Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Inside Archaeology, where we dig deep into the story of human history through our artifacts, monuments, and remains. Today, I'm very happy to bring you another video in my Ask an Archaeologist series. Our guest is Dr. Matilda Siebrecht, who is from the UK but lives and works as an archaeologist in Germany. In addition to her archaeology degrees, she also has studied journalism. She has a PhD in Arctic archaeology, and her research focuses are prehistory, experimental archaeology, and microware analysis. She currently works as the director of the International Experimental Archaeology Society, which is also known as EXARC, and as an archaeologist at a local German commercial excavation company. She hosts the EXARC show, Tea Break Time Travel, and My Travel podcasts in her spare time. In our interview, we speak about what inspired her, how she found work in Germany, and about her time doing fieldwork in the Arctic. Before we begin, don't forget to take a few seconds to subscribe or like to help support me in keeping the channel going and show the algorithm that people are interested in the stories of real archaeologists. If you want to take it further and actively support Inside Archaeology and all that we do, all super thanks or Ko-fi donations go right back into improving and promoting the channel. Without further ado, let's dig in. Welcome to the Inside Archaeology channel, Matilda.
Thanks for having me. It's exciting to finally be on. I've heard you know so much about this channel, so.
Oh, I like to hear that. We're going to jump right into our first question, which is what inspired you to study archaeology?
Well, so actually when I started university, I wasn't studying archaeology. I was studying film, which nothing at all to do with archaeology. Weirdly enough, when I was younger, my mother kept telling me, "You should totally do archaeology," and I kept going, "Oh no, that sounds so weird and not nice." And then yeah, at some point in I think it was in second year, a friend of mine, I went along to her with her to one of her lectures, and she was doing archaeology, and they were talking about human evolution. And I was always really into primates and monkeys and things growing up. I wanted to be a primatologist before I decided to be a film director. I had a bit of a weird early life crisis just before going to uni and decided, no, I want to be a film director. And I stopped doing zoology and did that instead. But yeah, so for me, it was like perfect because I'd always been interested in history. Here was the primatology part coming in because human evolution and looking at that side of things. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is what I want to do. So then luckily, the type of degree I was doing was very flexible. It allowed you to switch majors, I guess you'd call it, quite easily as long as you had done the prerequisite courses. So I just had to catch up on the second one. So yeah, so it was kind of just being lucky, being in the right place at the right time. I'd always had an interest in history, always had an interest in storytelling, which I feel is a lot of what archaeology is as well. And that's also what I realized at some point. And it just seemed to combine the kind of perfect combination of science and humanities and everything in it. So
It's always interesting to hear like the different paths that drew people into it because, you'd think that for everyone it'd be like, well, I watched Indiana Jones. But it's
right, yeah.
actually it's for some people it is, but for
Mm,
some people it's a completely different pathway as well. And I think it's nice because it shows again like the different ways that people can get involved and come
definitely.
across archaeology. It's not like you have to have, a certain background or whatever. Why did you decide to go beyond just a basic like undergraduate degree and get a master's and then a PhD?
The undergrad that I did was at Aberdeen. It was called Archaeology of the North, and it was about sort of northern cultures was the focus. So we did Vikings and North America and Siberia and Scotland. Apart from that, there was quite a broad focus. So it had archaeological science, you had field work, you had theory, you had like all the sort of really basic courses. So you had a really good broad understanding of archaeology. But I really wanted to specialize further because I really enjoyed the archaeological science component of it, and I really enjoyed materials and looking at the artifacts, and I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something to do with that. And I found a great course at Leiden University called Material Culture Studies in Masters of Archaeological Science. So I thought, oh, that seems pretty perfect. So yeah, and again, I had no idea what I wanted to do going into that master's either, really. I just wanted to improve my understanding of kind of materials. And I'd already been working for an excavation company for just like about a year in between. And I enjoyed it, but I definitely realized that I preferred handling the objects to working in the ground. So it was definitely
Sure.
something that I wanted to pursue further. And then that's also why then I continued into the PhD afterwards because I really enjoyed the research and I thought that I wanted to, at that time that I wanted to continue in academia. That has changed, but at that time I wanted to continue in academia Or at least I thought, okay, even if I don't continue in academia, the kind of jobs that I might want to do, it would be useful if I had a PhD.
I noticed in your bio that you sent over to me that you also have a postgraduate diploma in journalism. So can you
Yes.
tell me a little bit more about that deviation in the path?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'd always been interested in kind of storytelling and writing and things like that, and I've always volunteered for that kind of thing. Basically, I finished my master's, and as I think many archaeology master students who finish and decide, I want to do a PhD and think it's going to be as easy as going to do a master's. Unfortunately, it's a little more difficult to get. Well, you can sometimes get a position, but get a funded position is the key.
Yeah.
So I was struggling to find a position, applying to ones. They were never really the perfect fit. And at some point, you sort of get a bit desperate and just apply to whatever you think might fit, maybe. But, probably a good thing I didn't get them because I don't think I'd have been very happy doing them. So it was basically at some point I decided, okay, well, what else would I want to do? The thing with archaeology, at least I find, and whenever I chat to other archaeologists as well, we don't get into it for the money and the fame and the glory, right? We get into it because we're passionate about the subject. And unfortunately, that then means that at some point, if you have to hit a point where you then think, gosh, what if I can't do archaeology? It's a really heart-wrenching moment. And I
Mm.
had that because it had been 2 years and I hadn't found anything to do with archaeology that was paid. I was doing a lot of volunteer work. I was doing some smaller scale research projects that I could get sort of a fund for the travel, or something, but like nothing that I could live off. And yeah, so it was a real kind of moment of, okay, well, I was thinking, right, well, okay, if I could start from scratch, what would I do? What would I want to do? And I had been volunteering for a local English radio station at the time and really enjoyed it. I had to do little reporter. I had to find news items every week and I had to interview people and I read out the news on the thing and all this kind of stuff. And I was thinking, I've always liked writing and I've always liked that kind of thing. And I could still then write about archaeology if I did, journalism, like I could do archaeological journalism or scientific journalism, like it wouldn't be too far removed. So I sort of gave myself a little ultimatum that if I hadn't found anything by a certain point, that I would then start from scratch again, go back. And I was looking up jobs that I was interested in, and it seemed that the majority of them required some kind of journalism diploma or degree or certificate or something. So I thought, okay, well, I'll get a diploma then. So I applied for the London School of Journalism and I got into their postgraduate diploma program. And what was nice about that program was you could do it in person intensely for 4 months, I think it was, or you could do it online, long distance for 2 years. I thought, well, either way, I could just go to London and live there for 4 months. That'd be fun. Or, I could do it online. And actually, it turned out that the sort of week that I decided to do that and I got into the program, the next week I got offered the PhD position. So, and they would be starting at the same time. So in the end, I decided to do it online and long
Oh.
distance. So for the first 2 years of the PhD, I was also doing the postgraduate diploma, which was interesting because you have to write a very different style. You can't write academically when you're doing journalism. So it was very difficult for me to have those two headspaces. But I'm really glad I did it because it definitely taught me a lot. And actually, that's how I really got into, during the PhD as well, doing more kind of science communication and more accessible outreach and things. And I think that the journalism degree really helped with that.
So you said you got offered your PhD program, right, as you were getting into journalism, and your PhD is in Arctic archaeology, which I think is really cool.
Yes.
I've not come across somebody who's specialized in that before. So my question is kind of like why, and then like how is it different to non-Arctic archaeology?
Again, it was kind of being in the right place at the right time in a way. I happened to be looking for positions, like I said. And yeah, like I say, this was the last one I was going to apply for. I was thinking, right, if I don't get this one, because this one looked perfect. And turns out it was, so that was good. So as I said, I'd done like archaeology of the North in my undergrad, so I was already familiar with North American sort of cultural history in that respect. So I had that background, and I'd specialized in my master's in microware analysis. So the analysis of microscopic traces of manufacture and use on objects. And so I wanted to continue with that specialization in my PhD research, and I wanted to continue developing that method. But in order to be able to look at microscopic traces, the material you're looking at has to be very well preserved because you're looking at it at a 1,000 times magnification. So if there's any kind of degradation on the surface, it doesn't really work. And I had been looking at groundstone and amber, but I was also looking at sort of bone tools, and I was interested to try and develop that a little bit further. But trying to find well-preserved bone in a lot of places is not very easy, and even trying to find sort of large collections of things so I had been looking at beads for my master's, and that was what I was trying to get more into, was sort of ornamentation, beads and those kind of things. But actually it's surprisingly hard those kind of objects are often the subject of a lot of interest. And so because of that, they're often, I don't know, polished or, fixed with glaze or something, or they've been on someone's shelf for thousands of years. So actually doing microanalysis of them doesn't always work because they've already been yeah, they've been kind of
Handled.
too yeah, it's too, you're not sure what you're looking at. But so I was struggling to find case study material, I guess, that I could use for a PhD proposal. So that's what I was sort of trying to think, and I was looking for this. So then when I saw this position in Arctic archaeology and they wanted someone who would look at the material culture, they didn't specify how or what, anything like this. So I was thinking, well, actually, that would be perfect because it's Arctic, it's frozen, it's
Yeah.
beautifully preserved. That would be amazing. So then I sent in my proposal to say, look, I'm specialized in this. This would be what I would propose. This particular method, and they were really interested in it. And yeah, so in terms of Arctic archaeology, it was very different to anything I'd done before because. Even though, like I say, I had sort of been familiar with North American archaeological practice, I'd sort of been introduced to it through my undergrad. I had never worked with indigenous cultures before. So that was definitely a very different experience. And it's
Hmm.
something that even though I had thought that I was mentally prepared for and I thought that I understood when I started, looking back, I really didn't. And it sort
Yeah.
of is only through the PhD and through going up to these communities and that kind of thing that I've sort of understood it a lot more. I
Yeah.
think that was the biggest difference. And it's a very small community, research community as well, which was something different to what I'd experienced. And it was very interesting though, and I loved it. I really loved it. And I mean, if I could continue in it, I might, but it is a bit too, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it properly. But also, if I would do it, I would want to do it in a way that would be definitely be beneficial for example, Inuit communities, because they were the ones who I was mainly working with. And so I do have some ideas, but in order to implement them, I have to then go to Canada, and it's a bit difficult for me to do that
Yeah.
at the moment. And yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
other things going on.
You've mentioned obviously working in the Arctic, working in academia, and now you work in Germany. So
Mhm.
you've clearly come from the UK, moved to Germany, and you're working partly for an excavation company there. So, what brought you to the country? And in terms of archaeological work, were there any kind of like barriers transferring your experience or whatever from the UK to the excavation work in Germany?
Nothing really planned happened that I planned out. It just kind of all happened
Happened.
without me really realizing it would happen. So I met a German man basically,
Oh,
and
okay.
then consequently, it was decided, okay, we need to move to somewhere where we are native speaker, and we decided to go with Germany for
Mm.
various reasons. And yeah, so we ended up in Germany. My first excavation experience was during my undergrad. I dug in Portugal, which was amazing. That was a fantastic excavation, classic student excavation, and you
Mm.
have very little responsibility and a lot of fun. But apart from that, I didn't really do actually much excavation. And then I moved to Germany after my undergrad because of this man. And we'd been long distance, and then I moved there so that we could see if it worked. So I actually worked for the same company I'm working for now when I lived here before. So that was actually my first proper experience of proper excavation and excavation techniques. So actually, that's what I was first trained in, I guess, was the sort of German style of it. It wasn't necessarily between countries. I didn't really have as much of
Mm.
a experience of the changes in that. It was more between sort of academic excavation and commercial excavation. And actually now as well, I'm still not really working on site as much. I'm mainly doing the finds
Mm.
handling and storing and stuff. So and the social media outreach and that kind of thing.
Am I correct in thinking then that you was the language ever a problem, or did you speak German right off the bat, or?
No, I did not. So that was luckily the company were very open to it and they were
Mm.
very understanding, and I basically learned German on the job, which was actually funny because then indeed when I was learning about excavation techniques in English, then again afterwards, I only knew the German words for things because I'd learnt specific terminology in German rather than in English, and now I've lost it all again. So now I'm having to frantically relearn it again. The language is a barrier mainly at the moment
Mm.
because I'm supposed to be doing the outreach, and we're fast realizing that if you're not a native German speaker and you're trying to represent a company online through written content, there's going to be some issues that crop up. So that's something that we're dealing with at the moment. But in terms of the kind of actual finds and everything, it's mainly just vocabulary lists, that you
Mm.
have to learn, which I guess is the same for when you start doing archaeology as well. You also just have to learn all the terminology. So
One of the other things that you said was one of your focuses is like experimental archaeology because you're part of XArc, which is the
yes.
entire business.
No, no,
Very
EXARC is the International Association of Experimental Archaeologists,
okay.
and open-air museums as well. So it's sort of
Yeah.
that whole sphere, experimental
Mhm.
archaeology, ancient technology, reenactment, museums, heritage, very broad circle, yeah, that we encompass. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's really that honestly, I think that's really cool. Like I have throughout my life I've always loved those kinds of things. Like I've been to the Cranach Center in
Oh
Scotland
yes, yeah,
a few
yeah. They're
times.
an
Love
EXARC
it
member,
there.
so
Yeah.
there you go.
I've not been able to do much of it myself.
It was during my undergrad, and we learned about experimental archaeology in one of our courses, I think, like sort of as a bias thing. And I can remember chatting with my thesis supervisor when I was trying to plan out my thesis, and she was saying, well, what would you like to do? And I was going, well, I mean, really, it would be awesome to do experimental archaeology, but I guess that's not possible, right? And she was going, why isn't it possible? Of course that's possible. Because I think in my mind, I thought it was just like a thing that people do for fun. Like it's not an actual, method that is taken seriously. And I think that was an issue a lot of the time early on. It wasn't taken seriously. And luckily now people are starting to do it properly and actually treating it like a scientific methodology. So it's gaining more ground. And yeah, so it just kind of started. So for my undergrad, for example, I looked at Viking metalworking techniques. So I went and I worked with a blacksmith, and we used time appropriate tools and the closest steel iron material combination that we could find that would that's produced in the modern day that isn't too expensive. Long story short, I was looking at whether seaweed could be used in metalworking. So I was doing all sorts of different experiments incorporating seaweed. So trying to forge something using seaweed as a fuel, and trying to weld things together using seaweed as the welding agent, and creating tar and all sorts of things, because there'd been seaweed found in a site that my supervisor was working on. So she wanted to know why they might have seaweed in the smithy on this particular site. So that was kind of my first introduction to it, and I just thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing that this could be a job. Is just going, basically having fun and doing all these experiments and just being imaginative. And it involves so much creative thinking, because you really have to think outside of the box. You have to look at the material, you have to incorporate other sort of ethnographic accounts from other cultures, and these sort of things. So it's a very eye-opening experience a lot of the time, and you get to have fun actually doing practical things. And then for my master's, I was looking at amber beads and trying to work out whether you could tell what material of drill bit had been used to drill a bead based on the microwear traces that you saw on the inside of the hole. So the drill bit wasn't there anymore, but the traces that they left could be. So I basically had to do a load of experiments, drilling lots of beads with lots of different drill bit materials, and then I compared those with the holes from beads in the archaeological record. So that's also where I started doing a lot more experimental work, because with microwear analysis, you have to have experimental archaeology, because you have to have a reference collection of known traces, like how they were created,
A
in order
control
to be able to
sample.
compare that. Exactly. For the PhD, I was then looking at the bone and antler and ivory tools from Paleo Inuit Dorset cultures, so pre-Inuit cultures. So that involved lots of different things. I did some seal harpooning, not on live seals. It was a dead seal carcass. It had died of natural causes, and I got a carcass, and I got to do some harpooning, which was very surreal and bizarre, because I was looking at the wear traces on harpoon heads to see if you could tell whether they'd been used or not. I was doing lots of sewing experiments, so I made lots and lots of needles from lots of different materials, and had lots of different skin types as well, so seal and caribou and fox and all sorts of things, and I was sewing them with the help of a great help of students, an experimental group from Groningen University, where I was doing my PhD. They came and we would just sit in the stairwell for hours, and so to see if you could see different traces based on different materials. So a lot of the time it's just sort of replicating actions or materials or activities in some way in order to get a better understanding of how these objects were actually interacted with, I guess, in the past. So there's various different things you can do. So I mean, the ones I did were very focused because I was looking at traces, so that was one. But quite often people are just doing it in order to see, okay, does this work? Like, and not to then say, oh, good, that's how they did it, but more to say then, okay, this is a possibility, or it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Does it not work because we did something wrong? Does it not work because of the material? How would that go about? There's so much variation in experimental archaeology and in what you can do in that respect.
What is your favorite like archaeological experiment that you've either like done or come across? Or both?
Colleague of mine, Valerio Gentile, who's also at Leiden University, he's doing microwear analysis and experimental archaeology, but with Bronze Age swords. So he does basically fighting with Bronze Age swords, and then compares the kind of little notches that you see on the blade with notches on the little blades from archaeological record to see if the archaeological pieces could have been used in combat, because there was a lot of discussion over whether these particular blades were just ceremonial ritual or whether they might have actually been used. And in terms of my own experiment, in terms of sort of exciting results, there was a nice result from the beads where I was drilling, so these amber beads, and I had a drill bit made from antler and a drill bit made from flint, and I did my little experimental drilling, and there was quite different traces visible. I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if you could see these two very distinct traces on the beads from 7,000 years ago? And you could. And that's not to say that those beads were definitely drilled with antler or with flint, but it's exciting when that kind of thing happens.
What is your best and worst field experiences?
I think the best field experience, I mean, it might though just be indeed because it was my first ever dig, this one in Portugal that I mentioned. You were expected to, pull your weight, you were expected to do it properly, but they knew that you weren't experienced. So and we were in this tiny little village in the middle of Portugal, and it was just a very small team, and there was always fantastic food and, and drink and really nice surroundings and everything. So I guess that was more just the experience, but it might just be the nostalgia. Worst experience? I mean, weather's just always a thing. So, it was not an excavation, but it was an experimental house rebuilding project. And it was so wet and stormy. We were camping out and you could feel the ground shaking with the thunder because it was so a thing. And that I definitely didn't enjoy. That was a bit scary. And when it's so wet that, even your wellies, it's nearly getting to the top of and you're sort of thinking, oh, like really,
Why am I
I'm doing this
here?
for fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is really fun. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah. Next is, what is your favorite thing that you've either discovered or found?
Well, so like I say, I haven't done that much excavation, so I haven't found that much, relatively speaking. But one thing that I did find up in the Arctic, in 2019, I think it was, I found a little ivory polar bear pendant, dating to they think the Thule culture, the sort of ancestors of the current Inuit populations. And it was just this beautifully preserved because everything was frozen, and it was just such a cute little polar bear head and
Oh,
little figurine. And yeah, it was amazing to find it and sort of be like, oh,
yeah.
that's a really cute little object.
If you could choose, what artifact or discovery would you like to make or find?
Wow. So I have behind me here these amazing things, which, for those of you who are not familiar with them, they're called the calf stone balls. It's a very imaginative name. And the most famous one, which you might recognize, is the Towie ball, which is this
Okay.
thing. So they're basically from late Neolithic, early Bronze Age Scotland. There's been around like 400 of them found in Scotland. No one knows what they're used for. They're kind of the ultimate mystery object. No one has everyone has theories, and there's been so many projects, experimental projects as well, with like various different things going on. But yeah, there's no one can decide what they were used for. And as you can see, there's so many different kinds of designs. Like there's these ones, or there's one that looks like a grenade or something. These, by the way, are all replicas from Scott Knight from the Broken Biscuit Repair Shop, who makes amazing things, and I've just been gathering all of his replicas that he's been making. But yeah, they're just these fantastic items. And even though I don't know if it would necessarily tell us anything if I found one, but just to be able to find one and be like, oh, I find a new design of one or something, or even an existing design, but just see
Yeah.
one in the ground in person, that would be very, very cool.
What would you say to either encourage or inspire other people to follow in your footsteps?
Don't plan. Or don't worry if the plans go awry, because I think that was something that when I was younger, I really was focused on. I had my timeline, I had my ideas of what I wanted to be and what I wanted to do, and this was going to happen, and blah, blah, blah. And then at some point, when that didn't then work out, it was crushing. So I think a lot of the time people have these preconceptions of how the timeline is going to go and how their career is going to go, and yeah, it doesn't always work out. So I would say just take every opportunity that you can. So many of the jobs that I've gotten as well now have just come about because at some point I was like, yeah, sure, I'll try that, or I'll do that, or yeah, let's get a journalism degree. Why not? And I mean, that's what got me the basically, but it didn't. But so I'm now the director of Exarch, and that happened because they asked me to be a host of their podcast because they heard that I had journalism information, because I didn't do that. It was all these sort of things, and now I've ended up with the position. So stay flexible, take all of the opportunities you can, and just make sure, I guess, that everything you do, which I know I have had a very privileged position of being able to do that, but everything I've done, I've made sure that I've enjoyed it. So if I wasn't enjoying something, I'd try to stop doing it, because you spend a lot of your time doing work, and
Yeah,
if it starts to feel like work, if it doesn't start to give you joy, then I think you might need to reconsider. And even
yeah,
if it's something that you're like, but I've worked 10 years to be qualified for this role, if you're not enjoying it, then it doesn't
yeah,
matter. That's been a great 10 years and you can do something else now.
yeah,
So I guess that would be my advice.
yeah. But no, very true. Good advice. Last question for today is where can people follow you in your journey?
So I have a platform called the Archaeologist Teacup, which is sort of started on social media. There's also now a website, there's a podcast, there's a blog, which has just started. So maybe by the time this comes out, it might have one or two more posts. There is a YouTube channel, but it's slightly limited. So I haven't really worked on that for a while. Again, hopefully I'll get around to making more videos on that soon as well. But yeah, so the Archaeologist Teacup is what you can search for.
That wraps up everything for today. Again, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really interesting to talk to you and learn about Arctic archaeology and experimental archaeology, which are two things that I haven't really come across before.
It's definitely been an experience. But yeah, thank you very much for having me on. It was great to chat to you.
Awesome. Okay, guys, that's everything for today. What part of the interview did you like most? You can follow Matilda and her journey on Instagram via the Archaeologist Teacup account. Don't forget to comment, like this video, and subscribe to the channel before you leave. If you're feeling extra generous, you can go to my Ko-fi page and support me with a small donation there. Or if you want a more tangible return, you can visit my Redbubble store and buy some archaeology-themed merchandise. Taking a few seconds to support me in any way that you can really helps grow the channel and promotes quality heritage content that is well-sourced, researched, and presented by someone who is an expert in this subject. It shows the algorithm that people are interested in real archaeology, not just pseudoscience or conspiracy theories. Thank you so much for watching. Stay curious, and I hope to see you on my next adventure into the world of archaeology.